no long introductions. Tom is next on our list. Just wanted to briefly introduce Tom Rogerson. He's going to talk about the family governance. I'm supposed to talk louder, apparently. Family governance and how to help prepare the children for the business. So, Tom?
Yeah, great, thanks. Yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity. I'm really glad to be here, and I'm thrilled that Don, I work all over the country with many different organizations and different advisors, and Don, you're very lucky to have him in the region. What he does is very special, and his ability to assess needs in the business and assess abilities of family members. I just haven't seen many other advisors to family businesses focus as well as he does in that space. So anyway, I'm really pleased to be here, and thank you, Tom, for putting this together as well, and for Penn State. And actually, it's interesting, very few have commented on the fact that I'm wearing a Penn State bow tie. Only one person so far. That was given to me last time I was here. Anyway, so I didn't go to Penn State, but at least I have the bow tie. So anyway, my background is not the information I'm going to be sharing with you. My background really is estate tax planning oriented. I used to be at Coopers & Lybrand in Boston and built a financial planning practice for them in Boston to help business owners and high net worth families transfer their wealth as tax efficiently as possible to the next generation. But I started looking at the research going back almost 32 years ago now on why families were failing at preserving their wealth and their businesses, and it had almost nothing to do with the estate tax planning work that I was doing. It had almost nothing to do with the investment management choices that they were making, or even how well they were running their businesses at the time. But it had almost everything to do with how they were preparing the next generation for whatever roles they had down the road. Now, Don was talking about the fact that in your succession planning, you ought to think early, and then he started talking when he got into the minutia about 3 to 4 years out, what you should be doing, things like that. I'm going to take it even further back than that, and what you can be thinking of doing early on. It's setting a culture within the family. When I mention culture to most business owners, what do they normally immediately think of when I say culture? Culture where? In the business, right? And they just assume family culture is just what it is and it's all fine. Just like Don was answering the question about culture earlier about the business, the people that grew up in that culture, in your business, if they help build it and over time, they don't really notice the culture. It's just normal to them. But it's actually very different than other businesses' culture. Same is true of families. Families just grew up that way and they assume culture is what it is. Can we affect it? Well, if you can affect it at work, can you affect it at home? And is that important? And so I'm going to talk quite a bit about that. I'm also going to talk about the entrepreneurial mindset. This is not necessarily the notion of entrepreneurship, but an entrepreneurial mindset brought to family decision making and the importance of that going forward in how we think about things. And you're going to see, I do some work at Babson College, and I've helped create with them, and I'm rolling out with them, a family and entrepreneurship program. But it's to teach families an entrepreneurial mindset that they can bring to virtually any decisions they're making. It's not just about running businesses. It's about how they run their philanthropy. It's how they run their vacations and how they decide on them, things like that. So I hope you're gonna find some of that of interest. And what I do, it's really becoming a pretty hot topic. This is a list of trends in the high net worth space compiled by the Family Office Exchange. Most of these families that they were interviewing for this set of trends in the industry were family businesses and families that own family businesses. But this was top 10 trends in 2015 of what families were looking for from their advisors and what advisors were trying to scramble to figure out how to deliver to those clients. And I highlighted with little red dots the ones that relate to what I'm going to focus on, which is most of them actually. And it's that notion of creating more of a family experience rather than just working with dad or mom and dad or mom, but creating more of a family experience and engaging the whole family. Family education was becoming a meaningful component of what clients were looking for. And it doesn't mean sending them to a better college or a better school, because there isn't a course at college called How to Be a Better Beneficiary, or how to get your intended to sign a prenup and like it. Or what lifestyle should you afford, even if you can afford more than that? What's wrong with affording a higher lifestyle if you can afford it financially? Turns out there are a lot of negatives. Those things are not taught in college. And if you're letting your kids learn that on the street, they're probably learning a lesson you don't want them to learn. So how do you actually engage in family education? And what does a curriculum look like for a family education process? And I'll talk more about that a little bit later on, but it's a really intriguing thing of what we're seeing families do in that space of actual family education. And this can start early on. I was with a group of a board retreat up in Montana day before yesterday, doing a full day session on what I'm going to try and cover today. So I'm going to really abbreviate a lot of this. But most of that board for this organization were older, and I mean like 65 and up, and some of them were 80. And so for them, this notion of family education, they weren't thinking of children as much as they were thinking about grandchildren. And so I hope you're going to see, no matter what age you are and wherever your family is, there's an education opportunity that's huge. Family dynamics, the culture of your family is actually having a huge effect on wealth and family business sustainability and succession going forward. Integration is the notion is, do my advisors work as a team? Do they work together? Don advocated that you have your advisors work together as a team. Even most clients don't let their advisors work as a team. But even if they did, even if they said, hey, I really want you all to work as a team, most advisors don't know how to work as a team. And I'm going to come back to why that is, what the studies are showing around why advisors aren't working as teams as well as they like. So don't just pick a qualified advisor. Be thinking as you talk to your advisors how capable are they at working with other advisors as a team? Many times a top quality tactical advisor feels very much like they're they may not feel like they're this way, but they come across this way as if they're an idea bigot. It's their way, or I've got to have the ideas, all the ideas for my client. And if they feel that way, that may not be a team player, but a very, very self-conscious individual. How do we bring in the next generations? Millennials, Gen Yers, and Gen Xers down the road, and women think differently about wealth and success. In the next decade, it's projected that women will control more wealth in the United States than men do because of all the transitions happening. Estate, and also women are now business owners and growing great wealth, as are millennials. So millennials and women and how they think about success and transition and culture and family is different than a lot of historical leaders going in the past. And then family philanthropy. Now, family philanthropy is not the idea of encouraging your family members to give to charity. That's individual philanthropy. Family philanthropy is, do we do it together? What part of this do we do together? Which is a great way for them to practice and start learning how to make decisions together, which would actually help them when later they have to make decisions together about the business. But they're building trust and understanding of how to make decisions together with smaller amounts of money that are less consequential earlier. It might seem like the least important item on this list because it's the 10th out of a top 10 list. I think it's the most important on the list because it's the only one that incorporates everything else I just told you. If you're engaging in family philanthropy, that's a family experience that requires an education, revolves around the family dynamics, integrates the capabilities, brings in the millennials and the women and Gen Xers, and it's all around this notion of philanthropy. So I'm going to talk about how do you bring an entrepreneurial mindset even to the area of philanthropy. Well, that was 2015. In 2017, they updated this survey and they wintered it down to 7 trends. But again, I highlighted with the little red dots the ones that relate to the topic that I'm focusing on and I think Don's focusing on as well. But this number 7 here, family education, or finding engaging ways to educate the next generation and enhance family culture. It's amazing how many families are really very intentionally getting to the space of being intentional, thinking through family culture. Even if you think you have a great family culture, when your kids get to be about 25, 30 years old, they start bringing these new people into the family. Well, they have a whole different culture they grew up in. How do you have a process as a family where you're onboarding people where they feel like they're joining your family as opposed to feeling as if they're now removing someone from your family? And what does it look like to have a spouse onboarding process? And it might sound like, well, that sounds really touchy-feely. We're talking about business succession here. These people are really involved in the success of the family going forward. So how do you get them involved where they feel like they're participating somehow, some way? Maybe you don't want to bring them into family business decisions, but does that mean you should shut them out of every decision that the family makes? Where's the middle ground? And what are families doing to practice that? Well, George Burns had a great quote to start this off where he said, happiness is having a large, loving, caring, close-knit family in another city. And there's painful truth to that. We really have to be that way. I mean, can't we all just get along? My objectives then are really to do a number of things, but I want to discuss the observations and the studies around family businesses in general, family wealth, and then a family entrepreneurial mindset brought to all of these. I also want to hopefully translate learning into recommendations that you can walk away with actionable steps. Highlight the tool. I'm going to highlight tools that you can use as a family to get started in this space. If you feel like you're already in, great, keep going. But I hope you're going to feel that there's some new ideas you can bring to it. But if you haven't gotten started, I want to hopefully have you walk away with some really practical tools to get started. I also want to highlight one particular tool that you can use to endow the family culture building process and what that could look like. And then we'll get some feedback and perspective. Well, the underlying problem that a lot of the research I was focusing on was really originally centered on was this notion of shirt sleeve to shirt sleeves in 3 generations. The research was originally trying to help families protect their money because this was a very money-centric problem. This notion that first generation creates the wealth, second generations get used to the wealth, third generations enjoy the heck out of the wealth, fourth generation lament the fact that it's now gone. That's where my family is, right about there on this graph here, unfortunately. My great-grandfather is a very wealthy man. And I'm going to actually talk about previous generations to him in a minute when I get into, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about our family in a minute. But my great-grandfather by himself was a very entrepreneurial, very successful individual. He started a company in Boston called the Boston Safe Deposit and Trust Company, which he grew to be the largest financial institution in the Northeast by any measure. And he was very successful. He started the largest foundation in Boston that right now has a little bit more than $1 billion in it, and with a B. I mean, he was a very wealthy man. Even by Western PA standards, he was a very wealthy man. His estate plan was designed to get the bulk of his wealth down to the family. I'm his great-grandson, and it's gone, I'm sorry to say. Or I wouldn't be here. No, I would, but I'd be listening. I wouldn't be up here talking. But it's not gone because of bad investment management. He owned an investment management company. If you think you can invest your money better out of this problem, you're deluding yourself. It's not gone because of bad tax planning. One of his sons was one of the top estate planning attorneys in the country in his day. Not my grandfather, but my grandfather's brother. He had a great estate plan. If you think you can tax plan your way out of this problem, you're deluding yourself. It's gone because of how the family operated. And when I say that, I'm not saying anything bad about our family. Wonderful, loving, great family. But see if this sounds at all familiar for some of the people you may know. My great-grandfather was really comfortable making the bulk of the decisions on the wealth and the business pretty late through his life. And everybody was happy with him doing it because he was doing a really good job. The problem was the next generation never made a decision together until he was gone, of consequence. And by the time he was gone, they were older. They were in their 50s, late 40s at the youngest, and many of them in their 50s. And by then, they had kind of grown apart a little bit, and they were baked. And they were like, hey, bro, hey, sis, I love you, but you know what? I don't really know you well enough to make consequential decisions with you. Why don't we just sell the business and sell the assets and take our own share? And there's a military term for that, divide and. And it didn't take that long. And notice it wasn't just that they lost the business. We lost the business, but we lost the money too. So thinking you can sell the business and that'll get rid of the conflicts and then they'll have liquid funds and they'll survive better as a family long term, it's not what the studies are showing. Actually, there's a benefit to owning a family business and having a family have to work around how we're going to keep this going forward, because they learn about each other along the way. But our family business, do all family businesses have that culture? Oftentimes not. Oftentimes the decisions are made by the parents behind closed doors. And I'm going to come back to that more in a little bit, and what you can do about it in a simple way, in a safe way. Because so far, a lot of people get edgy about what I'm saying, because it sounds like I'm saying, gee, you got to start giving up control now. They're thinking of the business, and they don't want to give up control now. And I don't think you should. Well, what can you give up control of, though, that gives them the ability to start learning how to make decisions together, so that over time they can take the ability they've built up and bring it into making decisions on the family business? But not now, but bring it in over time. Well, when families were asked prospectively, this was a study done of families, that they were asking families that had been successful, hey, if this problem were to happen in your family, what do you think would be the reasons for it? So this was a future look at risk. What they said, well, the biggest risk going forward would be if my family doesn't know how to manage what I leave them. So if they don't understand sustainable spend rate and things like that, or they don't know how to run the business. I mean, if I leave some members in the family who don't know how to run the business, I could leave them ill-equipped, and that could really, they could lose the wealth and the business and all that. Second biggest concern was the economy. As you well know, there are cycles in the economy. We're at the end of a real long one right now, but there are cycles in the economy. If you understand cycles, you can make a fortune over time. If you don't, you can lose it. You're sure. Most investors chase past performance and chase cycles in the economy, and because of that, they woefully underperform. And if you don't prepare your family to deal with that, even if they're managing liquid assets, they can really get taken advantage of. But the same is true in the family business. If they're not used to the cycles, the last time that they want, the time that they don't want to invest in the business is at the low point of a cycle. That might be the perfect time to invest in a business. So that's a big concern of families looking forward. The third biggest concern to them is taxation. The government could tax away the family business. They've already spent the money, and now they could just collect it from us. And the smallest concern to these families when they looked into the future was the functionality of the family itself. Because we get along. We love each other. We have great Thanksgivings. Oh, let me tell you about last Christmas. Oh, and our vacations. We get along so well. So did my family. But we weren't making decisions of consequence together. And so the level of knowledge of each other and the trust that was built wasn't there as much as we thought it was. Well, wait a minute. If this is what they think the problem is, what are they focusing their attention on with their advisors? And I love Henry Ford's quote for this. He said, if I asked people what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. If you think the problem's up here, what kind of professionals are you going to work with, and what are you going to focus on with those professionals? And you're going to focus on estate planning, and you're going to focus on tax advice and what's going on in the economy. But what if the problem actually is down here? This doesn't mean a dysfunctional family. It can be the most functional family from a love and communication, so we think. But is there something going on that they might be blind to or missing? Well, this was a prospective look at risk, what I think might bite me in the future. This is a much more interesting study, because this one was done by Williams and Pressure of now over 3,500 families that owned a family business at least one generation ago. What they did in their studies, they asked these families, hey, how's it working out for you? And they were another one of the studies that found that most of the time it wasn't working out too well. But they went one step further and said, well, okay, you say it's not working out too well, you lived through the problem, what happened? So this isn't what do you think's going to go wrong in the future, this is what do you tell me you think actually happened from what you saw. And what they said was, and this goes back to what Tom Hoffman said in the original introduction, the bulk of the reason for failure, according to families of failure, was because of lack of communication and trust around group decision-making, around family culture. That's 60% of the problem. 25% of the problem, they said, was due to unprepared heirs. People receiving money, they didn't have the vocabulary what to do with it. And only 3% of the problem was due to failures in estate planning and financial planning and investment management mistakes. So as Tom said in the very beginning, the advisors that you're working with are doing a great job helping you here. But maybe there's something else we can and should be a little bit more attentive to or focusing on more. And unfortunately, many times the people that are giving you advice in this area don't have a background at actually, many times, many wealth creators, and I'm not trying to say you're all wealth creators, you're business owners, and you might think, I'm just growing a business, but you may have built up some value along the way, so I'd consider you kind of wealth creators along the way as well. But most wealth creators in this country are first generation. How many of you would say you came from middle class background, working class background, as opposed to how many of you say you came from upper class, and you're kind of at the same level of economic status as you were growing up? How many would say you came from a middle class or working class background? Yeah, it's most of you. How many would say you came from something extremely similar to where you've grown to now or where you are now? Sometimes there's one or two. There's a guy named Jim Grubman who I'll talk more about later on. He says, so what ends up happening is many of the people that have become successful in this country are immigrants to wealth. And I love the way he termed that. He's got a whole book about this called Strangers in Paradise, which I'll talk more about in a little bit. But they're immigrants to wealth. Well, guess what? Meaning that you're new to this. But who are you taking advice for what you should do? You're often taking advice from advisors who also come from middle-class backgrounds and went to college, and they're learning from books and learning on what you can do. And so where's the experience they have in helping in the cultural issues? And there are experiences to often go back to technical, tactical issues, which I'll come back to more a little bit later on. And this slide really said a lot of this. I was talking to that guy I mentioned before, Jim Grubman, who's listed down here, about families and independence versus interdependence. And I was saying to him, hey, Jim, I really want to help design a trust that would be a new type of trust that would, as you know, he said, trusts are designed to distribute money at some point in the future to beneficiaries. And he said, that's what trusts are designed to do. And I said, I want to try and design one that's not designed to do that. And he looked at me like, well, what would it do then? And I said, rather than distribute money to the beneficiaries, where they could then go out and buy things that they could hold in their hands, I'd love to create a trust that was designed to invest in the beneficiaries. So they don't walk away with anything in their hands, but they walk away with things in their head. They learn, and they learn together to endow the family governance process, the family culture process. And he said, usufruct. And I said, what the fruck is usufruct? Usufruct, anyway. He said, it's an old French term. Goes back to medieval days. And it refers to the fact that, and it's still in civil law, by the way, but there's this notion of that a community, a small town, might not own the land around the town, but they would farm it together. And they would share in the fruits of their efforts. And so they used the fruits, they used the fruct, they used the fruits, but they didn't own, they were separating ownership from use. And I said, that's really interesting because some of the families I've worked with that are very successful, multi-generationally, have actually used that exact terminology on some of their structures. They've tried to design some portion of their money that's in a structure that's designed to separate them, people owning it from getting the use or benefit of something. He said, And then he gave me a framework to put the research I was trying to get across, and everything I was thinking of fit in this framework. And it was where wealth and success, financial overall net worth of your businesses and your wealth as a family goes up as we go out in this direction, and level of independence of family members goes up on the left-hand axis. And what I was seeing was, low net worth families had a tremendous amount of interdependentness. And what I mean by that is low net worth families were sharing a lot of decisions and sharing assets. And dinner table conversations of a lower net worth family were very consequential. When Johnny says at dinner, can I borrow the car on Friday night? Everyone's involved because it's the car. When Jill says, can I go to college? Everyone's involved because if she goes to college, everyone's life's going to change. And so it was consequential. And they found that 15-year-olds in a family like that often knew the process of buying a car. Now, why would a 15-year-old not know the process of buying a car? They've never bought a car before. But in a family like that, they probably saw the whole thing happen right in front of them. They probably strapped in the back seat for the test drive, too. But they heard the dinner table conversation of what can we afford? Can we lease it? Should we not lease it? Should we do this, do that? As the family wealth went up, the family had the blessing, the privilege, the benefit of getting away from all that hardship, because that sounds kind of hard, doesn't it? And they had the privilege of getting away from that and focusing more on independence. Independence is great, except when it fully cannibalizes interdependence. And dinner table conversations in a more successful family tended to be more social, where the conversation would be, hey, how's your tennis game, Dad? How's your golf game, Mom? And they loved each other, great conversations, seemed really nice, but they weren't making as many consequential decisions at dinner. Does that make sense at all? And they found that a 15-year-old in a family like this often did not know the process of buying a new car or buying a car at all. Why? Because the more expensive the car was that mom or dad wanted to buy, the less likely they would have been to talk about it in front of the family. Thinking that, gee, if I talk about that $80,000 car or that $150,000 car in front of my kids, I could mess them up with the numbers I'm talking about. So not only were the children not participating in group decision making, they weren't even seeing how the parents were making decisions behind closed doors. This made sense to me. I don't know if it makes sense to you. My father's family comes from literally American royalty. And I'll come to that in a minute. But my family on my father's side in one branch was unbelievably wealthy, much more than my great-grandfather. My mother's family comes from Cuban poverty. My mother was one of 8 children that had like nothing when she was young in Cuba, southern Cuba, and down where the revolution started. And she remembers, and she would tell stories of when they were young, one year that her parents gave the 8 of them for Christmas a used coloring book and a few crayons to share. And another year they gave them one used beat-up bicycle for all 8 of them to share. They weren't totally poverty-stricken, but they had to learn negotiation skills. They had to learn, about each other. They had to learn a lot about each other. And that plus getting out of a communist country together. If my mother had a problem tomorrow, I have a hard time getting there in time to help her because my uncles and aunts get there before I do. The interdependence that was built was really strong. And some of you, when I describe this, might be thinking of your upbringing with your, children in these homes come home to the same house at the end of school. Children in these homes often go to private schools. Not always, but they often go to, college, which maybe didn't happen before. So the Jim Grubman, the guy that I mentioned before, he wrote a book called Strangers in Paradise. He was referring to the fact that the people that had built the wealth are immigrants to wealth. They don't know the environment of wealth, and so they're kind of stumbling around, learning their way and trying to figure out how do we do this so we don't screw up our kids with the success we've had. He wasn't focusing on the fact, though, that as the wealth went up, they were actually becoming strangers from each other to some degree in that they knew each other less. My mother's family knew negotiating skills. They learned life lessons at the dinner table. My father's family didn't learn any life lessons until after college. Does that resonate a little bit? Am I beating a dead horse on that one? Well, anyway, most families that have been successful desire to stay up here at this high level of independence. But, and what many people will say is, but some families of significant wealth would actually start to get back to a place of interdependence again. Now, why would a family that shares a family business, or shares a family foundation, or shares a family vacation location, or shares a family fill in the blank, why would a family like that possibly be getting back to a place of interdependence? Could it be because of this shared again? And many advisors would point out, yes, the reason this happens is because of these shared assets, like that family business, if we did it right, or the structures. Maybe there's a generation-skipping trust set up that they're going to work around, or a foundation they're going to give from the foundation together, something like that. What very few focus on, though, is are we building the understanding in the next generation to want to buy into these things? And you're going to see that the lack of building the understanding to want to buy into these things is a huge problem. And many times parents will go behind closed doors and set up structures and create asset structures to kind of almost like force the family to do things the way I want them to do it after I'm gone. And that's having a significantly negative effect on family success of preserving the sense of family. Well, and what you're interesting, you're seeing some other studies fit into the same graphic. Have any of you heard about the notion of can money buy happiness? Can money buy happiness? Have you seen any of those studies? And what's the answer? Can money buy happiness? No? At some point, no. But at some point, yes. What they found is money absolutely does buy happiness up to a certain point. As family income goes up, so does family happiness, but there's a plateau. And at a certain point, gross family income will keep going up, but family happiness actually starts coming down. You know what the high level of gross family income was for the maximum family happiness? It originally was $73,000. The most recent study said it's $105,000 gross family income pre-tax in the United States. So many of you might be above that level of gross family income. I'm guessing quite a few of you actually. Does that mean there isn't happiness? No, but what's happening though? And what they said in those studies was below that level, family members knew each other better. They might not have everything they wanted or anything they wanted, but they might have had everything they needed, but they had to learn how to negotiate, and they had to learn about each other. To know and to be known is a very foundational human characteristics. And they were saying these families actually knew each other better. Good or bad, you might think, oh yeah, but that was so horrible, it was so hard, and then we ended up hating each other. But there was a benefit as well to many families that they often throw out with the bathwater on their way to total independence. What are families doing, though, to build the understanding and to get back to this place of interdependence? And this is where we're seeing families engage in having family meetings. By the way, it turns out family meetings are not optional. Family meetings, families that are succeeding are having family meetings. It's not about the business, although the business could be talked about, during a family meeting. But the family meeting is primarily about the family. Somebody was asking the question to Don about what's culture, and he was asking, well, ask your employees, what does it mean to be a member of this business? What does it mean for us? How do we operate? And ask them provocative, open-ended questions about what does it mean? Same is true of family culture. We're seeing families actually start to have those conversations of what does it mean to be a member of our family? Could we create a family mission statement? Things like that. So having family meetings is a place to talk about things like that, about what does it mean to be a member of our family. And what we're seeing along the way is they're engaging in education process and family philanthropy and family entrepreneurship along the way, but doing things together to learn together over time. Well, the problem was the next generation. Where do they want to go when they inherit whatever they're going to inherit, whether it's family business or cash? They often want to go back to that level of independence again, because this sounds like it's a pain in the neck. And they want to go back to just individual household assets. By going back to get to there, they're often going back financially and dividing and conquering over time. And, well, it's not that independence is better than interdependence or vice versa. It's the balance between the two. But of the two, it's this one that I find we have to emphasize. This one we're already emphasizing. Why? Because we're American. And Americans believe in independence, right? I mean, it's called the Declaration of Independence, right? It actually isn't that. Read it again. The most famous line in it is not, I hold these truths to be self-evident. What's the most famous line in it? We hold these truths to be self-evident. It's a declaration of interdependence. It is based on our shared values as a country, separating ourselves from England, who had different values. So I'm not saying this is, yes, it's called the Declaration of Independence, we're becoming independent from England, but we were interdependent in that process. And families are often giving up this along the way in focusing on, as we've become successful, let's be just independent. And I even hear people say that. Money buys independence. Money buys freedom. For my children, from my children, from each other. But it's creating this separation that's having an effect on the ability to preserve a family business long term. And as I said before, Jim Grumbin, his book is called Strangers in Paradise. He focused on immigrants to wealth, not necessarily being strangers from each other that was being perceived in a lot of the studies. I don't mean strangers like you don't know each other's name, but you didn't know each other as well as a lower net worth family member might know each other that's having to learn negotiation skills together early on. Does that sound somewhat rational? Okay, all right, I don't want to beat too badly. And you're seeing this now in some of the work that's being done out there. Family Office Exchange, again, they work with very wealthy family businesses. But now one of the top things that's happening is families are focusing on education. I love this quote here. After years of considering themselves investment-focused family offices. So these are, and you could consider this after years of considering themselves a family business family. Patriarchs and matriarchs have realized that G3 education is the priority. And then this notion of focusing on cultural education is more likely to create more harmony down the road. Here's another one that was very daunting to me because my background's estate tax planning. So I really believed in, and I wanted to believe in, the notion of structure Structure will solve all issues. And here it is. Structures that are created to contain cultural issues. For example, trusts, foundations, business entities, family offices, private family trust companies, etc., tend to either institutionalize the dysfunction within the family or they're torn apart by the family. And even if you find a good enough attorney and advisor and all, that they can bulletproof your structure so nobody can tear it apart, the family trying to take it apart can divide the family. I was at a funeral last Saturday up in New Hampshire for a very good friend of mine's father. And this friend of mine, it was really tragic. His brother came, and they would literally stay on the other side of the room from each other. The parents had set up a trust to encourage them to, to benefit from each. One of them has children, and the other one has no children. The one that has no children is saying, this trust isn't fair because it's paying the education expenses of his children, and I should have gotten a comparable amount of money just for me for fun, because that would have been equal. He's sued it now 3 times, lost every time. Okay, great trust, right? They hate each other. I don't think that's a good trust. In that or maybe it's a good trust, but they didn't build the understanding, they didn't build the buy-in along the way. Turns out that's really important. Well, if culture, if this is the problem, 60% of the failures due to lack of communication trust around group decision-making and family culture, if that's the problem, why isn't there more focus on family culture? Because as Peter Drucker said, culture eats strategy for breakfast. I know people normally focus on this just from a business culture standpoint, but it relates to family culture as well. Most families, what we're finding as they become successful, are really more in a conflict avoidance modality in how they're raising their children. And some parents say, oh, no, that's not us. I bring issues right to the table. Okay, even if you do, is everybody in your family willing to come toe-to-toe to your conversation effectively? And if you're ready to bring the issue to the table, they, and or maybe everybody, may be more in a conflict avoidance modality. And if anybody's in the family is in the conflict avoidant modality, then the family's really slowly drifting apart until they get to complete independence, which is not a good place to be. Or they have an explosion. If they have an explosion, they jump way over here and they get to now they need expensive mediation, and it can be very expensive. Or they have a fast split. And they bypass this whole middle area where they're practicing conflict and they're learning how to manage conflict. Well, how do we move families from these extremes into the middle? And a lot of the things that actually Don was talking about is this idea of preparing families for roles in the family business over time. But originally, if you want to prepare a group of people to work well together to fit into those roles, whether some are in the business and some aren't, one of the first things that they have to be able to work well together is trust. And you can't just, if they have allowed themselves to not build trust, it's hard to jump in and just build that. And so what we're finding is some of these practicing opportunities are ways to build that trust stronger now so that they're more likely to buy into what the family does down the road. Because if you think, well, it's not that big a deal, they get along, everything's going to be fine. Well, there are many different potential ways family businesses can be transferred from a mentality standpoint in the mind of the owner. And when I show this list of potential ways that a family could think of transition to the next generation of a family business, usually the parent will say, yeah, of course, and that one's right, and they'll pick one. But then I show the same list to the children, and they often pick a different one. So should there be conversation about some of these things? Because the families are often headed in different directions. And this, again, relates to so much of what Don does. But Patrick Lencioni is one of the top business consultants in the country. And I love some of these quotes in his book called The Advantage, which is a great book, by the way. But he says, the vast majority of organizations today have more than enough intellect, experience, and knowledge to be successful. What they lack is organizational health. Take out the word organization and put it in family. Very similar. No finance, or not finance, not strategy, not technology. It's teamwork that remains the ultimate competitive advantage, both because it is so powerful and so rare. Well, the same can be said of families that we're seeing in the studies across the country. And now at Babson, What's interesting, and I love this quote and some of the work that I've been doing at Babson. Babson recognized years ago that they say, they had people coming to them and saying, hey, as a graduate of Babson, we built these businesses, we're really, everything's going great, but how do we raise entrepreneurs? How do we raise an entrepreneurial mindset in our children? And so Babson looked at, what kinds of things are entrepreneurs doing? What makes them different? And right away, people came up with the same things we normally think of. They're risk takers, and they're good communicators, and they're leaders, and they're type A's, and they're hard chargers, and all these wonderful things. But in their study, they said that's actually not universal. There are some entrepreneurs that are not great communicators. They're more monkish. They're analytical types. They're programmers, and they said there wasn't that. And many of them don't think of themselves as risk takers. They're very calculated in their risk taking. And so they don't actually view it many times what they're doing. They might be investing at the bottom of an economic cycle. Is that a high risk venture? Turns out over time it's not. That's the perfect time to invest a lot of money, as anything. And so were they thinking of themselves as risk takers? And so what Babson found was that there was a distinction, though, between entrepreneurs and non-entrepreneurs. And I love the way they worded this. They said that what we found was entrepreneurs tend to be people that do to learn. Whereas mid-level managers of companies that can't seem to get out of their own way on the corporate ladder are people that seem to need to learn to do. And I love the way they worded that. They said entrepreneurs are the kind of people that say, that idea and that idea, they ought to work together. I'm doing it. And they wouldn't necessarily do tons of research along the way, but they would, and through experimentation and trying, they would often succeed. And so I love this quote from Aristotle, which really gets to this. For things we have to learn before we can do them, we learn by doing them. It sounds like a conundrum. How do we get a family doing things together from a decision-making standpoint so they build the trust and understanding and all that, so they can take that trust and understanding into the family succession process going forward? Most business schools around the country, when they teach entrepreneurship, they're not really teaching entrepreneurship. So some of the studies have shown. And it's something like 80% of businesses that have entrepreneurship classes are really not entrepreneurship classes. What they often focus on is things like identify an opportunity, develop the opportunity, understand the resources, acquire them, develop it, blah, 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 and then exit strategy. Isn't that business management? Doesn't entrepreneurship actually take place just before this process begins? And what Babson and others have recognized, entrepreneurship is not a process, it's a practice. It's a methodology, a practice. And the practice has 5 components. The practice of play. Now that sounds kind of stupid. Play, that doesn't sound like really important. But that's to be able to develop a free and an imaginative mind, to be able to think outside the box. You can actually teach people. You can't guarantee that they're going to learn it, but you can create environments where they can have an opportunity to actually expand that. And many schools don't have that in place. Practice of empathy. And it might sound, well, that's not involved in business. That's not. Yes, it is. What their observation there was, if you're going to try and create a business that's going to solve some problem in society, better pricing, better whatever, you have to have the empathy to know, well, what's wrong in society that I can solve through this idea. So practice of creation. How am I going to creatively think outside the box to come up with a solution to that problem that I perceive due to my empathy? And then how do I experiment, and fail and learn and experiment and fail and learn and along the way? And then there's the practice of reflection. And it really looks like this, because the 4 practices are on the outside. But the middle one is this practice of reflection, to be able to reflect on each one of those steps along the way. Well, Babson originally put this together as the way to teach entrepreneurship. And what I've come to them to help develop is, okay, that may not only be the way to teach entrepreneurship, flip the coin over, it's the way to learn entrepreneurship. But when you're learning it as a family, in a family, that circle is happening within the pea soup of the family. And so there's the same circle, but it's now inside. We've got to do this within the family culture and within whether we interdependence or independence and family, of wealth and conflict practices and education practices, leadership styles of family members. And this is where, in creating the family entrepreneurship program, one of the key components is, what's the pea soup of the family? What's the culture of the family? How do they start focusing on that so they can then build the practices within that going forward? Entrepreneurship as a process looks like this, very kind of straight line. But as a method, it's different. It's collaborative, not competitive. Entrepreneurial families tend to be families that are able to stay down in the lower end of this. As their wealth goes up, they tend to stay down in the lower end of this, and they don't get as high on the independent scale. There's a notion of, I mean, yes, they believe in independence and your children should be blessed to do whatever they want to do, but there's a notion of, but as you do that, don't forget that there's something we ought to be focusing on, what it means to be us. Does that relate, or does that kind of tick you off as I say that? Any thoughts? Pardon?
I said it sounds hard.
It sounds hard, yeah. Yeah. Changing culture is a hard thing, and if you've ever tried to change it at work, most people will say you really can't change culture. You can influence it over time, and the same is true of families. You can't just change it overnight, but you can influence it over time, and you can influence it pretty positively. Well, I want to kind of go the next step by giving you the tale of two families to put a backdrop to this. And Jamie Forbes is a friend of mine from the Forbes family. Do any of you know of Buzzards Bay in Massachusetts? Anybody know Buzzards Bay? Marion? Yeah, that's on the other side of on one side of Buzzards Bay. Buzzards Bay is, if this were Cape Cod, it's the armpit of Cape Cod. Not in a bad way. Geographically, that's where it is. It's a beautiful area for sailing and all. But half of the shoreline of Buzzards Bay is the coast, the mainland. The other half is a set of islands called the Elizabeth Islands, owned by the Forbes family, like 10,000 acres. And huge, incredibly valuable. And Jamie's a part of that family. And he and I were talking about our own families and our histories. And we said, we ought to put this together because there's real lessons that everybody could benefit from. And we're learning a lot from it. His patriarch originally was John Murray Forbes. And he was a ship captain, made a lot of money, ended up investing in real estate and other things, bought the set of islands. My fifth great-grandfather was much more successful than his fifth great-grandfather was. Mine was also a little bit more pompous. Doesn't it look a little bit more pompous? He was unbelievably wealthy. He was the largest ship owner in the world in his day, according to Lloyd's of London. He owned and he was the largest shipbuilder in his day as well. He owned 110 merchant ships plying the waters from New Orleans to England in the cotton trade. And he was incredibly wealthy and incredibly successful, so much so that they called him here in America King Caesar. That was what he was known as. And there's a museum in the Boston area now called the King Caesar House, named after him. And it's his original house. And it's a public museum now. Anyway, he's unbelievably wealthy. Smart guy, too. Really smart. Well, both families established some waterfront property to congregate the family and bless the family and be able to use going forward. This is a picture of one end of Noshawn Island, which is where Hadley Harbor is, and Woods Hole goes right, if I expanded this picture out, Woods Hole goes right through here, right about there. But this is right off of Woods Hole, and it's called Hadley Harbor. And my family owned this thing called Eagle's Nest Cove. One branch of our family owned Eagle's Nest Cove. And all of this land when I was born was in the family. And there were 3 houses on it. And it was very valuable. And like 86 acres on the water. Anyway, that's kind of where the similarities end. Because their family still owns all of that. Our family doesn't own any of this except for one lot. Their family, if you go to the island, what's really cool, they have one of the buildings is about the size of this building here, or this room here, and the second story, it's like a barn, and they store equipment downstairs. But if you go up the stairs in the second story, they have around the walls their family tree. And so if you walk up the stairs, here are the stairs right here. Right in front of you is John Murray Forbes and Sarah Forbes right in front of you. And if you follow the lines around the wall, the top of the wall from them, it goes out to portraits or pictures of their children. And if you follow the lines from them back, it goes out to pictures of their children. And if you follow the line from there, it goes out to names of their... If you're old enough to walk up those stairs, you can walk around and find your name on that wall. And you'll see the connectedness. When you go to orientation, which you have to go to if you want to be able to go to the island, you've got to earn your way in to use this. You don't own it, but you can use it. Usufruct. You can use it, but you have to earn your way in. You've got to go through orientation. In orientation, you're given the family history, and you're walked through this. Each of the family branches has their own placard in the middle of the room that has stories and information about the individual branches. It's really cool. I mean, I get goosebumps every time I tell that story, what they have as a family. I certainly got goosebumps when I went and looked at it. It's really cool. It means something to be a member of that family. And they've got all kinds of practices around that. My family, if we want to learn the history of our family, we have to go to a public museum. And that's King Caesar's house, that part of it, and it extends. But anyway, we have to go to a public museum. If we want to get pictures of our family, like I showed you that portrait of King Caesar, I have to go to Wikipedia to get that. We don't own any of these things anymore. They're all gone. And stories about the family from old public magazines. The original design in their family was in a trust with certain purposes to it. But accidentally, their purpose was not to create family harmony and family working together. But their purpose was to just preserve safety of the family members on the island, and to preserve from liability and things like that, and to preserve the ownership of the island, hopefully multi-generationally. That was the purpose. But the process of how they operated has totally transformed the family. My family, we were much smarter than they were. We were very enlightened. And so we believed in giving each person an equal share because we want to empower the individual, because that's important to us. Very smart. We were very intellectual. And so we left it to individual family members outright for them to do what they wanted with it. Their family, what did they do with the process? They had to create a set of rules for safety's sake, swimming lessons and sailing lessons, because they didn't want people drowning and things like that. They have an orientation process. They've got team building exercises they do on the island very intentionally. My family, we didn't have any of that stuff. We were focusing on building the unique, independent individual. We have very strong personalities in our family, and we have some people that have been very successful, but it's like shooting stars. It's not part of the family. It's shooting stars off and away from the family. Intangible results. They say there are huge results from it. Intangibles, they know each other better. There are fourth cousins that are starting business together because they know each other and doing philanthropic things together. There's tremendous knowledge of each other as a family. My family, the intangible benefits was really, they weren't there. It was real independence. Tangible results, which most business owners are more concerned about, show me the money. They have economy of scale on money management. They have access to better products and capabilities. They created a family office that gives them access to a lot of that. We owned a wealth management organization that we didn't focus on. They have family entrepreneurship opportunities. There are businesses that are started by fourth generations together because they know each other so well and know each other's abilities. Family philanthropy, they engage in more philanthropic endeavors together and have accomplished more. They have results along the way. Lower costs down the road. They have a great vacation place. We had a great vacation place, but it got sold off, and it got sold off at really bad times for low values, like almost always at the bottom of an economic cycle. You're seeing this in other families as well. The Rockefeller family. In a number of surveys, but I did one recently where they highlighted the key points that they say that have helped their family be successful multi-generationally at business development, not in business ownership. Same thing with the Rothschild family. Very similar overlaps. Same thing with the Searle family of G.D. Searle and Mellon family. Most of the families in this survey, I only mentioned those names, I know they're recognizable, and they're gazillionaires, so you might think, well, that doesn't relate to us. Most of the families in this survey, though, actually were names you wouldn't recognize. And they're families that own family businesses, were much more in line with many of you in the room. But they were recognizing the same things. If they were succeeding, we're helping them succeed. And what those things were, as I mentioned before, number one was they really were having organized and prioritized family meetings, not to focus on the assets, but to focus on the family. There might be a separate meeting or a portion of the meeting that would focus on the assets in the business, but they made sure a major portion of the business of the meeting was about the family. Often they would use outsiders, facilitators, because they were recognizing the wrong person to lead this charge is often, the wrong person to lead the charge is often dad, sorry to say, or mom and dad. Because if there's a family culture where there's been kind of an authoritarian or top-down decision-making process, one parent said it this way. They said, no, Tom, I love the idea of you coming in and running the family meeting or us bringing somebody else in to run a family meeting. Because he said, if my family hates everything you say, they hate everything you said. I thought, I'll take that bullet. Not everything I said. I mean, I had one family that the father had run the family meeting. He's a real type A, and I'll show you what leadership style he was later on. He was a director style leader. And, after the family meeting, he said, oh, nailed it. I talked to some of the members of the family later on, and they said, oh my goodness, he just told us what we need to do. And he's thinking he nailed it. So one father said it this way. He said, no, I love the idea of outsiders helping up because, he said, because the opposite of control is participation. And if every now and then we bring in an outsider to run the meeting for the family, then we as parents get to sit back and participate, and rather than try to drive the outcome. And he said, if nothing else, even if I don't say a word and I just sit there and listen, and somebody else is getting my children to speak and their spouses to speak, I will be able to take that information and go behind closed doors with my attorney and create a better plan because I'll have a better idea of what they're actually thinking. But I can't do that myself. I did another family meeting where the father wanted me to show them the estate plan. This is back when I was at Cooper's, and I showed them the estate plan. And then the father said, okay, family, I did this for you. I love you. I want this to bless you. So what do you think? And they're all saying, oh, Dad, you're wonderful. You did a great job. It's your money. Do whatever you want with it. We don't really care. And I thought, wow, what a magnanimous, wonderful family. So during one of the breaks, I asked one of the sons, I said, is that how you really feel? And he said, absolutely not. And I said, well, why'd you say it then? He said, the two things I don't want to sound like in front of my parents are stupid or greedy. If I say, what's a trust, I sound stupid. If I say, when do I get it, I sound greedy. So I felt like it was a setup. So does that make sense? So anyway, so I encourage you that almost all these families were saying they don't always, but they try to use outsiders to help start the process going. Select special places. I wouldn't have thought this was important, but it turns out just doing it in a boardroom, because many of the memories you have, you're probably, when you think of that memory, you're thinking of people, but you're often thinking about a place simultaneously. And it turns out most of the families said, let's pick a nice place, because we want them to want to come. And so let's pick, it doesn't have to be the same place. Oftentimes they would go to different places each year. And then do team building exercises at the meeting. I think all of the activities that I mentioned before, like family philanthropy and entrepreneurship and education, they're really, if nothing else, they're team building exercises and opportunities to work together. And then I believe if you can endow the process, and this is the trust that I created with a friend of mine. We call it a FAST. It stands for Family Advancement Sustainability Trust. I know it's a mouthful, so just call it a FAST. But it's designed to endow the family meeting process. That's all it does, is endow the meeting process. But building and communication and trust, which are the key components of families that said they failed, through group decision-making turns out to be really important, which is what that trust was designed to do. Families that tend to succeed, though, multi-generationally, as they build independence in their individuals, family members, they're somehow maintaining a sense of interdependence. And I love this quote that it really builds off of this whole notion of this. And this is something you're supposed to say to a really wealthy person, really financially successful person. It's a Chinese proverb. And you say, you don't have enough money to give your children the blessings of growing up poor. I know right away you're thinking, yeah, but it stinks to grow up poor. Yeah, there's a horrible list of bad things about it. But there are a few good things that we often throw out the baby with the bathwater. And what are those good things, and how do we reintroduce them to the family so that they have that better sense of place? Malcolm Gladwell, in talking about some of these activities you can do, he describes these activities as meaningful experiences. He's the guy that wrote Tipping Point. And I remember when I was reading Tipping Point, and I get to a point where it said, it's not that important that you share values with the people you're making decisions with. And right away I thought, he's wrong. Everything I read says that's wrong. And then I read a little bit further and thought, oh my goodness, he's describing this pretty accurately. Because what he said was this. He said, think about your best friends from high school. Think about your best friends from college. And think back then when you met them and got to know them. Did you become best friends with them back then because you knew you shared values with them? Is that why you became best friends? Or was it that you shared experiences with them? that they were on the same team, the same dorm, the same fraternity, sorority? Wasn't it through those meaningful experiences you came to even know what their values were? And don't you have some friends that have different values than you do? I thought, oh my goodness, yeah, I got a friend that's a Yankees fan. Talk about different values. But I'd die for that woman. And so it was just powerful that it was the meaningful experiences that built the ability to even get to know what their values were. And so what we're seeing is the Family Advancement Sustainability Trust, or the FAST, was designed to endow the building of experiential opportunities for the family. Thanksgiving dinner is an experiential exercise, but it's not a family meeting. And it shouldn't be. You know, you can throw rolls and gravy at Thanksgiving dinner. A family meeting needs to have some rules around it that the family has to buy into. So it is a little bit different. You know, because some families, when I've seen them, when I've run family meetings for them, we take them through step 1 on their way to maybe getting to step 10. They want to get to step 10. But step 1 is where they just get interested in the idea. And Don said self-awareness is really important to start to help an individual realize they may not have the abilities for the roles that they were hoping for. Self-awareness for the family is really important to help the family start to think through as a group, what do we need to focus on? So, so creating that awareness is really important. And so when I take a family through a family meeting, they're often getting pretty excited about what we may be able to do. And they want to get to this place where they've got mature family governance. This doesn't mean that they no longer have divorces, and they no longer have substance abuse, and they no longer have, issues in the family. There are normal families that get to this level, but they have a mature family governance process. Do you know what I mean between the two? Like this kind of a family, when they come together for the family meeting, they often will come and they'll participate in making decisions together, but that doesn't mean that they're going home to perfection of families. Second marriages, whatever, and spousal problems, and and children issues, and so that's what I mean by that. But they want to get from beginning to the mature place. But they don't know what's next. What's step 2? Because there's a big gap between those two. And they often start out full of a lot of vinegar and excitement, but they don't know how to get to step 10. Because there's all kinds of things you're going to hear people talk about that you ought to be thinking of doing to get there. I mean, like a family constitution, or a family mission statement, or a family philanthropy. And I was doing a family meeting about 3 years ago for a family. And a year and a half later, I ran into one of the daughters, and I said, hey, how's it going? And she said, metza. And I said, well, what do you mean, metza? That's not so great. She said, well, yeah, Mom and Dad said we need to have another meeting, 6 months later. And they said, we need to create a family constitution. So we got together and created a family constitution. But we don't know what it constitutes. And the parents took the enthusiasm of the first meeting and pushed the family into their idea of what was next, not the family's idea of what was next. Does that make sense? And so, this was one family that actually came up, this was their process. I'm not saying this is the process, this is just their family bought into it, so this was the right process for them. But they created a family mission statement at the next meeting, came up with a decision process, an education curriculum, and an onboarding process for spouses, and engaged in family philanthropy. But this was their process to get to maturity. And they've got a really good process going forward now. But how do we get there? The Family Advancement Sustainability Trust is really designed to help families get there. It's not a structure trying to contain cultural issues within the family with structure. It's a structure trying to invest in improving the family culture. And that's a very different process. And this type of trust is really designed to fund the activities of the family and the leadership. Just like a board of directors needs to have outsiders from the family like Don was saying, so does the family leadership process on this. So the FAST provides leadership. It's just, think of it this way. Here's Dad, here's Mom, here are the parents up there, and here's this additional trust that they could set up, that they could put a little bit of, not a lot, a little bit of resources in, just to endow the meeting process for the family to continue to learn, to hire people like Don, to hire people like me or other consultants, whoever they need to help them out. It's just one of the tools the family may have in the rest of the estate plan, but it's just a different mentality. All of those other trusts are designed to distribute to beneficiaries. This one's not designed to do that. It's designed to invest in them. So it provides funds for the activities I talked about. But I mean, to me, this is what I just so profoundly see. The parents that I work with are the kind of parents that are much more likely to endow a chair at a university to help educate people that they don't know than to endow a chair at the family table to help educate people that they know. Why wouldn't you do both? And it turns out this idea, some people say, oh no, yeah, I've done this. I've set up a 529 plan. A 529 plan pays the education expenses of your children and grandchildren to go to separate, colleges, schools, whatever. And that's great, they're getting a wonderful education, but they're not learning about each other in that process. And this is designed to do something different. So that's why the FAST is designed to do these things. So the summary really is, family capital takes many forms. Recognize the value of family intangible assets and try to grow the intangible assets. From a business perspective, there's a great book out there called now I'm going to forget the name of it. Drat. I was just reading it. The Experience Economy, and the other one is called Capitalism Without Capital. Those two books, The Experience Economy and Capitalism Without Capital, both focus on this notion of investing in the intangibles. Even in your business, by the way. I mean, I think that Capitalism Without Capital is a good book for any of you to read. And why entrepreneurial mindset brought to all this makes sense. Everything I'm talking about, by the way, from a family standpoint, is really bringing that entrepreneurial mindset that I was talking about before to the family process going forward. Because as Don was saying earlier, if you own a business that by its nature can exist multi-generationally, great, that's helpful. Like if you own a winery, they can last for multiple generations. But if you own a Blockbuster video franchise, you better have been entrepreneurial along the way, or that business is gone. And Don was even saying in regard to other aspects that there are changes you may have a great business that's been around for 3 generations, but does it have what it takes to keep going for 2 more? I don't know. But having an entrepreneurial mindset will help the family tweak it to have it be more likely to succeed, and if it's not, to come up with different operations going forward. Sustaining value and values over time requires practice. Structures will not solve this by themselves. Investing in intangible assets can yield the greatest return over time. And consider tools that ensure your intangible assets receive appropriate support. Most families are failing at this. What they're finding is about 70% of the time, families that build up wealth in one generation have lost it all by the end of a second generation. To make it worse, 90% of the time it's gone by the end of a third generation. And whether it's a business or you sell the business and you just have capital. One recent study showed that 80% of the family money was gone if they sold the business within 50 years of the founder's death. Not typically the desire of the founder. And yet the studies continue to come back and say it's happening. And yet so many people say, yeah, but this is the soft stuff. I got to focus with my advisors on the hard stuff. This is the hard stuff. But it's worth it to invest in some of this. And what we're normally seeing when it comes to advisors is there was a wonderful study asking the typical successful individual, who are your main advisors? Now, Don listed a list of like 8 different advisors you could work with. But in this study, it was a little bit lower net worth people than probably many of you. But I think directionally is really interesting to see what they said. But they said there were 3 main advisors that they would typically work with. And client being here in the middle. One would be the attorney doing the estate planning and setting up the documents and all. One would be the accountant doing the tax work on a yearly basis. And the other was the investment firm they're working with, whether it was a lower suitability type brokerage approach to working with them or a higher suitability, a fiduciary type approach. But then they asked these people, well, what's your relationship, your communication like with these 3 different advisors? What they said was, with my attorney, I'll call him when I need him. Every 5 years, 15 years, 20 years, I'll call my attorney and say, how's my estate plan? With the accountant, they said it was more of a 2-way conversation because we get together every year. So we talk about projections on whatever. And with the investment advisor, it was depending on which type. They said if it was a suitability type investor, like a brokerage type approach, it was more of I expect to get a call from them with some product that they think I ought to be buying into. If it was a fiduciary, it was more of a 2-way conversation. Here's my point on the slide though. Where's the conversation between the advisors? And not only that, Many times the client wouldn't let them talk to each other because they think it's going to be more expensive. It's more expensive not to. But not only that, even if you said, hey guys, folks, I want you to work together, many of them don't know how to work together because all their other clients think the same way. And the other thing is kind of an ego thing that goes along with this. If I'm the accountant, if I'm at Coopers & Lybrand, and a client of mine comes in with a really good idea that they heard from another accountant, how might I feel about that? So I'm at Coopers & Lybrand, a client of mine, really important client, I get a lot of fees from them, and they come with a really good idea that they got from another accountant on a golf course somewhere. How do I feel? Threatened? Nervous? So what's probably going to come out of my mouth? All the reasons that they shouldn't do that idea. I could make ice cream look like a bad idea in August if I only focused on the calories and the saturated fats. And I'd love to say, gee, that's just other advisors. I felt threatened by other advisors coming in, clients coming in with really good ideas. Be aware of that. You've got to have advisors that have thick skin and are willing to collaborate and not have to be the idea bigot in the room with all the ideas. Because oftentimes advisors to clients build a shield around the client from getting new ideas. And then who's the project manager in that process? The client is. They talk to this person, they try and relay it over here, they try and relay it over here, and they try and relay it over here. I'm sorry, but the client's the wrong person to be the telephone operator between these advisors. What should it look like? Ideally, the attorney is an integral part with the accountant, who's an integral part with the investment advisor, and they're communicating for the benefit of the client. And project management, I literally wrote an article about this for advisors on how do we as advisors help a client in a project management area, because no one of these persons is the project manager for everything. When the legal work is being done, yes, there's a project manager. When the accountant work is being done, yes, there's a project manager. Or the investment work, but they're different depending on what is being done, and that has to be a revolving role. But I go back to Malcolm Gladwell. You can't share values with others until you share meaningful experiences. All of these things I'm talking about are ways of getting the team together, working together, including the advisors. When I run a family meeting for families, one of the things I really like to have happen is have all the advisors to the family at that first family meeting, because we're going to teach them their leadership style. Why wouldn't the family members want to know the attorney's leadership style? Because they're going to have to work with the attorney over time. Why wouldn't they want to know the accountant's leadership style, or Don's communication style, or mine? So it's really important to pull it all together. Little train opportunity, and I'll finish up in a minute. This is just the notion of how do you start? Big train to me is you running your business. That's the big train. You don't want to let your kids in and grandkids in on that right now because they're wet behind the ears and they don't. And I get it. You don't want to let them in on that. And it's not only that; it's your identity. You don't want to give up your identity to people that are not ready. But how do you encourage them to build their own set of tracks, get their own train up and running, so they can step into your train over time? And that, to me, is the family process, the family meeting process and all. I call it little train, but this is where you can set a vision. And I love this quote that this actually came from the Pritzker family, and this is Nicholas Pritzker in his book. He was the one that started Hyatt, came from Russia with nothing, like a nickel in his pocket, and then started Hyatt. Very successful. But in his own book that he wrote for the family, they let me take this one quote out of it. He ends up referencing the Rothschild family and all, but it's this wonderful quote about this Krylov proverb. But parents come in and they give their children a bundle of reeds wrapped together. And they say, break that. Each one of the kids takes it, can't break it, can't break it, can't break it. But then they take the wrapping off and give each one of the kids one of the reeds separately and say, break that. And they all are able to go, snap. And they say, that's the vision we want you to have of this family, that together there's strength. That one of those reeds could have been broken in the beginning and you still couldn't have broken the bundle. And you may be strong your whole life, and I hope you all are. But somebody in the family may need that support, and I'd love you to be willing to use your abilities to help. That's just a different vision. It's now on the top of their motto and their family shield. There's no rocket science to that, but it's worth doing as a family. It's asking the question that Don was asking about, what does it mean to be a member of our family? It's beginning to think about our family culture. How do you practice decision-making as a group? Family philanthropy is a great place to practice it. My wife and I have 4 children. We start out by letting them give away $5,000 a year. $1,000 each personal endorsement. We love you, do what you want. The fifth thousand they'd agree on. It's the fifth thousand that made most of the difference. How do you go the next step? From this is family philanthropy is making decisions that have low consequence to family. How do we go to more of a discipline where we're making decisions with slightly higher consequence? We did this around vacations. My wife and I set aside a pool of money that we let our children manage. And we said, guys, make any investments you want. Here's the deal though. We're going to pay for one of our vacations every year from the earnings you earn on that account. So if you do well, we're going to go on a better vacation. If you do badly, we're going to go camping. First year we went camping. They bought all these penny stocks of toy companies, and but they learned a lot about each other's abilities. One of my sons is an analytical type, and he likes researching investments, and he spreadsheets it out. They saw that ability, and they now choose him to manage the money for the family in that regard. If I had seen that ability in my son and chosen him to manage my trusts and my estates down the road, I could have ticked off the rest of him for the rest of their life. But because they chose him for that role, whole different kettle of fish. It's like Don was saying about, self-awareness. By them working together, they learned each other's strengths and weaknesses and where their roles are and how they can fit in. One of my daughters is an artist, and she really likes researching where we're going to go and putting it on the family website. It's really cool to see what she puts together. She loves it. She's got a role, though, that fits her abilities. And to show you how this can kind of blend together, I just told you my kids do philanthropy together, and I just told them they plan a vacation. 5 years ago, they wanted to combine those two ideas together. And for the family vacation, they wanted to go back to Russia to visit the orphanage that my daughters are from. We adopted all 4 of our kids, but our daughters are from Russia. And for philanthropy, they wanted to donate a playground to that orphanage. And here's a picture of the playground that my kids donated to the orphanage in Moscow. And here's a picture of my kids at the orphanage. My daughters are here, my son's there. When we picked up our daughters at this orphanage, they're about the age of those little girls in the background there. This was transformative for them. And I show this to some other people, and they say, oh, yeah, we did that. We took our kids on a mission trip to El Salvador or something, And I go, I'm glad you did. But that's not what this was. And here's the difference. We didn't take our kids on this trip. What happened? They took us. They're not driving the big train, which is, I don't have a family business, but for me, it's my retirement account and, my consulting practice and all. They're not driving that. But they're driving this little train thing, and they've learned a ton about each other's abilities. They've built trust about each other's abilities. One of my daughters has a learning disability. She's learned to trust her siblings when they work together on her behalf, and they've learned they need to work together on her behalf. That's been worth every minute we put into this. The New York Times liked that story so much, they wrote an article in the New York Times about our family, which I can get a copy of too if you'd like. But then, how does this transform your legacy? This is where the structures you set up, and this is where the linkage between all the work you do as a family to build preparedness can ideally fit the structures. If you do this kind of work as a family, you could sit down with Tom Hoffman and create a much better plan that will fit the needs of the family hand in glove. If you don't do this kind of work as a family, it's much harder for Tom to come up with a plan that's going to fit your family. It might fit your mentality, what you want, but are they going to accept that? And grandchildren down the road. So, bottom line is, I've got a bunch of resources that if you'd like on these different topics I can share with you. I've got a process I advocate called the 5-step process or 5-step practice to get to family governance. If you want the slides, give me an email address, give me a card, or I didn't have enough cards for every one of you to get one, but every other spot had one of my cards, and I've got a few more if you need one. But if you want, just email me, and I'll send you the slide deck that I just used, so you can have all the slides that you saw. But it has in it things I'm skipping, which include the list of resources for each one of the 5 steps that I think families can go through. So feel free. But my family didn't work out so well. Their family worked out really well. And they're doing things differently. And, their great 5th great-grandfather versus mine, ours was much richer. And we are nowhere near where they are now. I do encourage you to build independence. Don't get me wrong. But I think you're already doing that. But I think a lot of families are not as intentional in building the interdependence as they could be. And I love this quote to kind of finish off. If you want to go fast, go alone. You entrepreneurs know exactly what I'm talking about with that one. But if you want to go far, go together. And that requires being open. And I encourage you, Go together in less consequential ways before you bring them into the more consequential decisions. It leads to them being able to do it, but don't start there. So find your fiduciary, let your team work as a team, let your family work as a team. If we can help, I mean, certainly love to. What do you do? If you'd like the slides, as I mentioned before, I'd be happy to send them to you. And if you'd like to see what I or Don or any other advisors could do to help out, to help you get, and even if you bring somebody in to run a family meeting and they go through some of this material, the worst case scenario is the family feels like, you know what? This is a good pat on the back that we're doing the right kind of things. And sometimes that's what the family experiences. Usually they're saying, this is more than just a pat on the back. There are opportunities here for us to up the game and get better at this, or maybe even just get started. Well, that's a lot to cover. I hope it was helpful. I mean, I tried to deck up probably more than I should have. I know I've gone a minute or two over. If we can stay a tiny second or two, I'd be happy to take a question or two. But as I said, I can send all the information if you'd like it. Any thoughts before we end? Questions? Did it make sense?
The only challenge is listening to this is like drinking from a fire hydrant.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
the only analogy I can think of.
Yeah, I know. I go really fast. Don said he talked fast. My mother's from Cuba. I talk really fast. so Cubans talk really fast. I apologize for that. And I always do the same mistake. I deck up more than I probably should. But I don't know what to cut out. I really like to cover everything I covered. But the slides will help you a little bit. And then the resource list. I mentioned Jim Grubman's name. His book's on the list. Children of Paradise is a really good book to read. That idea of immigrants to wealth and what it looks like and why most families fail. That's a good book. There's a bunch on the list. You're going to see there's a whole bunch of resources on the list. So that'll help you slow it down. Call me too. I'm happy to just spend some time on the phone trying to slow it down. I have to talk theory up here. When you call me on the phone, I can talk application because then I can hear about your family. And then that's a lot easier for you to absorb application than it is for you to absorb theory. Yes?
In one of your early slides, you used a term called G3 education.
Yes.
I have no clue what that is.
Sorry, that's nomenclature of G1 is the first generation, G2 is the second generation, G3 is the third generation. Sorry about that. I should have clarified that. Good, really good point. Yes?
I thought it was fascinating and just, it was wonderful. So thank you.
Oh, thank you.
My question is, when you hear business models where you have the business side and the exchange of ownership within the business, my question is, in light of that, what's the definition of family in the sense of this conversation?
Yeah, it's a really good question. In fact, one of the board members out in Montana asked that very question, what's the definition of family? And I said, kind of like what Don was saying in one regard, family is often more than the people you're thinking of. It might be the employees. It might be the community. It might be, a lot of things, the charities you give to, the causes you care about. So, but normally the bare bones minimum family is bloodline. Expand that out, it's bloodline and spouses. And I've got a lot of families that have said, gee, if we didn't have a method of bringing in some of the talent of our children's spouses, we would have missed out on some great talent along the way. So how do you do that? And that, is something we would talk about. Then you add blended families. Oh my goodness, now it's getting complicated. Because then it depends on when did they blend. Did they blend when the kids were really young and they grew up together? Then it's really easy to blend them in. But if they blended when the grandchildren were 30, they're not going to have a kumbaya experience and sit around toast marshmallows and talk about what it means to be a member of our family. So every family is different, but that's what I meant by if you give me a call, tell me a little bit of what you're thinking of, I might be able to give you application that fits where you are. But it's a really good question of what's family. And I'm finding most wealth creators think that family is more than just the bloodline. And it includes things like employees and meaningful partners that help me build the business and things like that. I've really gone over. Should I take one more? Any? Perfect, no more. Thank you very much. I hope this was helpful.
Okay, just want to do some wrap up here. So again, a phenomenal program from Don and Tom. Let's welcome. I'm Greg Philbeck. I'm the director of the Black School of Business at Penn State Barron. And I just want to spend a couple minutes talking to you about our school. Ralph talked a little bit in the introduction about about Penn State Barron, and the Black School of Business is certainly proud to be a part of that and a part of the Penn State system. The Black School of Business offers 9 undergraduate degrees. We offer 4 graduate degrees. We've got 1 in process, and we also jointly work with the School of Engineering on the Masters in Manufacturing Management. One of the things that I think is really unique about our school is we hold the AACSB accreditation, and for those of you who aren't familiar with it, it's the gold standard of accreditation among business schools. Only 5% of business schools worldwide hold that designation, and we're the only school in Northwest Pennsylvania in the business schools that hold that designation. We're very, very proud of that, but it's a lot of work that goes into that, a lot of assurance of learning, faculty qualifications, and again, basically delivering a product based on what we say we're going to be carrying out as a part of the mission and tied into AACSB requirements. I also want to mention that we are very heavily involved in a learning by doing model in the Black School of Business. And so with that, we try to invest very heavily in the community, but we also try to prepare our students to be able to be what Gene Natale at CS McKee, the greatest compliment I think I've heard from any of the employers of our many, many students over the years, said, you guys that come out of the Black School of Business, you guys are workforce ready. And I thought, you know, that is a really high compliment as we really try to connect theory to practice in terms of what we do. We have a couple of outreach centers that are very, very active in the Erie community. Many of you know about the Economic Research Institute of Erie, and Ken Louie, Dr. Ken Louie runs that center, and we've got a fantastic program coming up on July 25th called Revitalizing Erie's Economy. And each year this institute puts on a fantastic program. I know many of you have been to it. What Ken does each year is just phenomenal. We encourage you to come out to that program. Kathy Nose, which many of you know as well, leads Partnership Erie, which has worked with almost 300 nonprofit organizations over the last dozen years, basically putting together websites and helping them be able to engage in social media. Many of them not able to afford those services otherwise, and getting them launched. We talk about quality, metrics of quality. Ralph mentioned return on investment, which is something we're very proud of as a part of our graduates coming out. Because as a parent of 3 sons, I'm very concerned as when I send my children to school, you know, how are they going to come out? How are they going to do after graduation? But also getting recognition, both within the Penn State system, because we are one university geographically dispersed, but also in terms of what we do here at Penn State Barron. Our business school is recognized by Princeton Review and also by U.S. News and World Report as among the best schools in the country. And we're very, very proud of that. Just to take an example, our financial planning program, for example, was ranked 7th in the nation, behind Virginia and ahead of Michigan. So I thought that was pretty good company in terms of what we're doing as a part of our products there. So again, I'm gushing, I know, but I'm very proud of the work that goes on in the Black School of Business. You know, a couple of things I want to mention too. I mean, the work and again, thanks so much, Tom, for putting this together. I mean, this is such a phenomenal and needed topic, and the presentations by Don and Tom, I think, are just really illustrate some of the very important needs that are unique to family businesses. Family businesses are very close to my heart. I was at the University of Toledo in the 1990s, and I served as the Associate Director for the Center of Family Business. We had 130 family-run businesses that basically came together and said, we want something for us to be able to exchange ideas, to be able to share best practices and so forth. It was one of the first family business centers in the country starting in the early 90s. And with that, I got involved with that center, and again, so many opportunities for family businesses to interact, for organizations that consult with family businesses to be able to have opportunities to interact with these family businesses and so forth. I actually have published 2 articles. I've published, I mean, finance is my area, but I've published out of my close to 100 publications. I have several in family business journals. In fact, Family Business Review is considered to be one of the best journals in family business. And actually, one of the studies I did, when I was hearing all this discussion about succession planning, one of the things that we did is we worked with conflict management, team building, and family businesses, and we published a series of case studies based on that research. I'm certified in the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, and as Tom was talking about issues related to succession planning, a lot of times we would come into these family businesses, and I would ask the owner, you know, are there any communication issues? Not at all, nothing, everything's fine. And then you would get in there and you would start working with a tool like the Myers-Briggs, and suddenly, you know, the kids had a different take on what was going on. And this had a little bit to do with the ability to increase communication flow with that. I've also got a publication on financial management practices in family businesses, which can be quite different as well. The point is family businesses are a unique entity. You're managing a business, but you're also managing the family relations. And it's such an important and vital role. And Erie, it's very heartwarming for me being from Kentucky, in case you're picking up a little bit of a southern accent, but coming into the Erie area, the passion that takes place in here and how families care about what's going on here, and roots run really deep in Erie. And so much of what happens in our regional economy happens because families have been so dedicated to this region over time. It's very, very moving. We're exploring the possibility, if it works out in terms of the greater Penn State system, for us potentially taking on a greater role in family businesses. And who knows, maybe one day we'll end up with a Center of Family Business here hosted by Penn State Barron. So just in closing, you have a questionnaire that was distributed to you. Your feedback is so vital to the success of efforts that we'll have going forward. Before you leave, make sure you fill out this survey because it's really important that we get your feedback. And in terms of contact information and so forth, on the program on the back, you have the contact information for Tom, for the speakers, for Brett who put this together. All of this information is available for you. So make sure you take this with you if you have any follow-up communications or questions, in case you didn't get an email address or whatnot with that. So please take the time to do that, and we really appreciate it. So we really appreciate you guys being here. And again, thank you so much for Tom for being the brain behind this effort. So. We have a reception outside for the next hour, so we encourage you to stay around and chat. But again, make sure you fill out those surveys.